on Vamps R Us, we will be interviewing Twilight moms with various opinions about Stephenie Meyer's Twilight. Meyer's Twilight series have generated a phenomenon that has been causing quite a bit of controversy over its effects on teenage girls. The books focus on Bella, a teenage girl with low self-esteem, no control of her choices, and an undying love for a seemingly perfect vampire named Edward Cullen, who is constantly saving her from danger. Our first mom comes from San Diego, California. Everyone give a big round of applause to Tanya Applegate.
Hi, Mariyam. Thanks for having me here tonight.
Glad to have you. Well, Tanya, in the letter that you wrote me, it seemed that you were almost obsessed with the Twilight series. Can you explain?
I wouldn't say obsessed, but my description of Bella portrays the perfect daughter. She cooks, cleans, does her homework, and rarely breaks curfew. Who wouldn't want a daughter like that? I wish my girls did half the stuff that Bella does for Charlie.
Speaking of perfection, you mentioned Bella and Edward's relationship as the perfect romance.
Well, my girls are at the age where they may want to go further with their boyfriends, and I can only pray that they find a man like Edward to promote sexual abstinence and protect them from harm, and make all the right choices for them.
I find this very interesting because a lot of mothers find Edward's controlling personality troubling. How can you defend Edward?
Well, if Bella was a fucking dimwit making such irrational decisions like jumping off a cliff, Edward wouldn't have to make them for her.
I suppose you're right, but let's move on to some other opinions. Let's see what Karen from Peoria, Arizona has to say about this.
Thanks, Mariyam. I think Tanya is completely out of line blaming Bella. Edward treats Bella as if she is a child and incapable of making her own decisions. For example, in Eclipse, Edward refuses to let Bella go to La Push and disassembles her engine. Even when Bella chooses to go see Jake, Edward does everything in his power, besides kidnapping her, to keep her under his control.
Well, Tanya mentioned Edward's no sex before marriage rule was a good role model for her girls. What is your opinion on the matter of abstinence in the novels?
Although Edward does practice sexual abstinence, which I agree is good, it's a good thing for adult novels, the way Maya portrays Bella is completely out of control sexually is offensive to women.
Offensive? Do explain.
Edward is allowed to initiate intimacy, break things up when things are getting out of hand, and Bella is almost punished for physically desiring the man she loves. This sends a message that young women are incapable of controlling their own sexuality, and it takes a man to keep them in check.
Wow. Looks like you did some serious analyzing, Karen. Let's move on to Amy from Raleigh, North Carolina. Amy thinks that the Twilight series promotes her children to read. What makes you think this, Amy?
Well, after reading the series, my youngest daughter Susie went on to read Wuthering Heights and Romeo and Juliet thanks to Bella.
Well, many would argue that the themes in Romeo and Juliet and Wuthering Heights, along with the Twilight series, advocate suicide. For example, Bella jumping off a cliff, Romeo poisoning himself, Edward provoking the Volturi, and so on.
Well, in my opinion, these books weren't written to promote suicide, but rather to symbolize everlasting love.
That's an interesting point of view. Well, besides the additional reading that the books promote, why else do you have a positive stance on the series?
Stephenie Meyer is able to make morality something of value, sets up a riveting moral image that many girls who read these books or watch these films have not been introduced to.
I believe you have made a great point there, Amy. Now let's talk to our last guest, who loathes the Twilight series just as much as Karen did. Come on in, Meredith.
Hello, everyone.
Meredith, you came all the way from London, didn't you?
I wouldn't miss an opportunity to bash the Twilight series.
Well, okay. Well, in your letter you wrote me, you told me that Bella was being infantilized by Edward. So maybe give us a few examples of this.
Of course. There are many ways Bella is infantilized. For example, Edward writes a lullaby, a piece of music that is usually associated with infants, not someone you consider your equal, sexually or otherwise. Maya also uses language like cradle to describe how Edward holds her, which is a disturbing father-like characteristic.
I agree. Well, in your letter you also mentioned Bella as a weak female character. Would you care to elaborate?
Definitely. Maya fails to give Bella much of an interior life. She is a blank slate with few thoughts or actions that don't center around Edward. Outside of him and occasional outings with Jake, Bella doesn't do anything more than go to school, cook for her dad, write to her mother, read, or find faults with her clothing.
Well, maybe that's why it's difficult for Edward to see Bella as an equal, since she has no personality in your perspective.
That is exactly right, Mariyam.
Well, that's it for our show tonight. Audience, let's hear a round of applause for our Twilight Moms. Tune in next week to hear our interviews with vampires Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise.